Welcome, Tijl De Bie. You are a professor in artificial intelligence at Ghent University in Belgium. And I think it's safe to say that you are very familiar with all the aspects of the technological challenges facing us today. We saw yesterday a letter from European Commissioner Thierry Breton to Twitter. They are starting a procedure for disinformation. Could you tell us what is going on here?
For now, it's an investigation, and part of it is regarding the way that X is going about disinformation. The European Commission is of the opinion that there are reasons to believe that X is not compliant with several parts of that regulation, including the way they handle disinformation, but also other things.
Professor, you are one of the probably rare individual who has actually read the Digital Services Act. Could you maybe summarize for us what is this all about? And I know you as somebody who's quite moderate and who tries to follow the evidence wherever that may lead. As far as I know, that you do not think this kind of initiative is totally ludicrous. You can see some common sense in wanting some kind of regulation. But the specific way in which this DSA is handled, I think you have some remarks.
The purpose of the DSA is to fill a legal void, and the specific legal void they want to fill is who is accountable for illegal content online. That's the primary focus: illegal content, who is accountable, and what should be done about it. But while addressing that legitimate need, they, in my opinion, overstep the goal a little bit by, well, quite a bit, by also trying to address disinformation. And disinformation they try to address in a way that is not agnostic of the information. By that I mean that it really depends, the measures they expect online platforms to take depend on what information precisely it pertains to, which means that somebody will have to make a decision about what is disinformation, what is correct and what is wrong, and then take measures in response to that, which is very tricky because we have seen in the past, in the full human history, let's say, that it is very difficult to distinguish what is true and what is false. That is the part that I'm concerned about. There's some other things in the DSA as well, which I really applaud, which is the fact that it is creating more transparency with regards to the way that platforms go about content moderation on their platforms. So that is something that is also something that is certainly needed. And then a final thing is there are some measures in the DSA which are meant to protect minors and vulnerable groups, which is again a good thing. But my main concern, and it's a very important concern, is about its ambition to not only tackle illegal and harmful content for minors, but also content that is perceived by the European Commission as being disinformation.
I'm a bit surprised to see that, again, Twitter or X is singled out for this letter by Thierry Breton yesterday, because as far as I can see, they seem to be making a genuine effort to do content moderation with the community notes, which, as far as I'm aware, seems to be quite an innovative and well-performing way to handle this. What is your take on these community notes? Do you think it's falling short? Do you think it's a good idea? And is this a good way to handle the concerns that the DSA wants to solve?
It is certainly not the way that the DSA authors had in mind. That is quite clear, because one really appealing aspect of the community notes is that it is content agnostic. I already mentioned before, what I mean by that is that community notes, they apply to any content. It's not like they're only applied to content that is singled out by the European Commission as being content that they believe is harmful or potentially misleading or maybe incorrect.
So the way that community notes are conceived is content agnostic, as you would call it.
Yes, this is how I call it indeed. So there are measures that apply equally, irrespective of the actual content of the X posts in this case. Yes. Which is different from, for example, a content moderation policy that is enforced or encouraged, let's say, between quotes, by the European Commission onto those platforms that, for example, will suppress very specific kinds of messages. And that is very different. That is not content agnostic. It depends on the specific message that is being spread by those posts. Somebody has to make this judgment on what information is desirable and what information is not desirable.
So that's the latter seems to be more the way that Twitter was organized before it was taken over by Musk, whereby Twitter was actually weighing on the scales to encourage a type of message and to discourage other types of message. They were really trying to influence the debate. Since Musk took over, this seems to have largely disappeared from the platform, and it's more content agnostic, as you say. So all of this makes me wonder, what is the real purpose of this Digital Services Act? Is it really to protect the users, like the European Commissioners would like us to believe? Or do they want to promote the messages or discourage the messages which they like? This seems to be quite unclear.
I cannot look into the heads of the people who made this act, of course, and I tend to believe that people are well-intentioned, but I also think that people can make mistakes. And the reason that a mistake was made here, in my opinion, is maybe to a large extent attributable to the fact that the act was written and approved entirely during the pandemic. And I always tend to say that they went shopping on an empty stomach. They wrote the act at a time when everybody was afraid of disinformation and felt that something had to be done about it. And I think that the members of the European Parliament and the members of the Commission and the heads of state, they were more receptive to the idea of an act that would limit certain kinds of messages based on the content of these messages.
In a tweet, you referred to an article which was written by Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Google, and Jonathan Haidt, a very well-respected sociologist, where they point to certain dangers and they also point to certain solutions regarding AI, which is really your field of expertise. In that field, some legal framework seems to be necessary even. Could you maybe elaborate a little on that part of the discussion?
At present, Europe is finalizing a European AI Act, which is a similar kind of legal instrument as the Digital Services Act, which is meant to regulate the use of AI at the European level. And of course, there might be some interactions, but it is really an independent act, which I do think is very much needed. And there's risks to that act as well. But I'm less concerned by the current drafts, even though I also have concerns about some aspects of the last draft that I have seen. But the current draft is not publicly circulated.
Is this draft addressing the concerns regarding AI along the lines that Schmidt and Haidt are pointing out in their opinion piece in The Atlantic? Is it going in that direction, or what can we expect?
No, actually not at all. So I can say I know what piece you're talking about. So they're talking about the dangers of AI on social media.
Yes.
And essentially claiming, and I agree, claiming that AI will essentially cause all the problems that we see on social media to be exacerbated. I think that is indeed very justified, in part because it will be possible to create social media bots that are indistinguishable from people. And they can be indefinitely multiplied, which of course makes a number of really important challenges. But this is something that is partially tackled by the draft European AI Act, but I think not sufficiently. It's focused more on different kinds of risks than this. It's not so much focused on the risk of AI to democracy and to public discourse, although it is of course a part of it to some extent, but not very directly.
I always read your tweets with interest, and as far as I can see, the solution that you seem to be proposing, the main characteristics are that people should be responsible for their own content, but you think that the platforms should demand anonymity is discouraged. And then if people are no longer anonymous, that they are responsible for their own content and should not be policed by the platforms. And then where the content is anonymous or cannot be tied to an identifiable person, there you say the platform should indeed be responsible. Is that a fair assessment of your position, or is it more nuanced?
It's a fair assessment. I would make one nuance, which is the fact that I wouldn't say the platforms need to be encouraging people to not be anonymous. But I think they should offer people the possibility to not be anonymous and to treat people who are identified differently from accounts or who are anonymous. Yes. So the DSA was trying to solve this accountability problem, as I mentioned, for illegal content online, and that's of course a real problem. And the DSA somehow took the position that the responsibility, once the platform is aware of content being illegal or allegedly being illegal, that they become responsible, they become accountable. And that may lead and will lead to platforms being overcautious. They will be policing content even before a judge has been able to make a decision on whether this is truly illegal or not.
Yes.
Then you can appeal. There's various ways you can appeal it, or also enforced by the act. But appealing and then being told that you're right months after you made the post is, of course, not useful. For that reason, I think for people who are identifiable online, there is no reason that their accountability should be transferred onto the platform where they make their posts, where they speak their opinion. And I think in those cases, it is better to stick to the law that we already have and to just say, well, these people, we know who they are. They can say what they want because we have free speech and freedom of information. And if they say something illegal, then they will pay the price for that, which is the normal course of law.
The normal, let's say, the national legislation should not be substituted or superseded by terms and conditions which are set out by the European Commission.
Well, the last part is really important. Indeed, they should not be set by the European Commission. Of course, it is totally valid that platforms make a certain decision regarding the target audience. That may translate itself into certain terms and conditions that certain content is unwanted on the platform. And it's not up to the Commission to interfere in that and to say that they cannot do that. At the same time, I think the Commission should refrain from enforcing elements in terms and conditions which are not directly implied by laws that outlaw certain kinds of content. Disinformation is one example. It's not illegal to lie. It's not illegal to say falsehoods online or anywhere. And it is a bad idea to then strong arm the platforms to include into their terms and conditions that disinformation of whatever type is illegal or is not allowed.
It also seems to me to a term which is too wide, because if you follow any type of discussion in any parliament in the whole Free West, then you see both sides of the political divide constantly accusing each other of disinformation, and it's just it's a discussion that never ends. It was pointed out, I believe in one of your tweets, that the European Commission should not act like some kind of a ministry of truth, which seems to be the way this is headed for the moment.
I'm afraid it looks like it indeed, yes. So any discussion about truthfulness of information risks ending up becoming a political discussion with a political decision in the end in this way because of the DSA, because ultimately Europe may decide that a platform is not doing their homework in relation to the DSA and impose really high fines if they do not comply. And complying means adapting their content moderation policies, adapting the terms and conditions, adapting the way in which they use information that is sent to them through trusted flaggers, which will be appointed under the DSA. And they will be organizations that have a precedent status when flagging certain content as being illegal under the DSA.
I believe you criticized in the weeks that went before already that the European Commission does not seem to respect their own regulations regarding the DSA when they start moving ahead against these platforms, because a lot of the things which are set out in the DSA are simply not in place yet.
Yeah, so by the 17th of February next year, each member state should have appointed a digital services coordinator, and that's a national organization that will then appoint the trusted flaggers and out-of-court settlement dispute organizations, like special kinds of courts that will settle disputes under the DSA. And these digital services coordinators, they come together in one European board that will then is called the European Board for Digital Services. And that European Board for Digital Services will be able to recommend to the Commission to declare a crisis situation. And only when they recommend a crisis situation, the European Commission can declare it and demand measures from the platforms, that they investigate what can be done to mitigate that crisis. And even so, even though those digital services coordinators do not exist yet, Thierry Breton, the commissioner, the relevant commissioner, has used the term crisis, which has a legal meaning now, in a letter sent to the platforms a couple of weeks ago, asking him to take measures in the context of the Gaza war at present. Which I think was an abuse of power because the term crisis is a loaded term in the context of the DSA. It's not something he can do at this stage.
There seems to be legitimate concern now that if you have this kind of, on top of the DSA being, let's say, not formulated in in an ideal way, the DSA being the target of legitimate criticism, I think. They are superseding their own regulation with this crisis notion. And then I think we will see that we will probably move from crisis to crisis, where they can more or less decide what they want to see on any type of platform globally.
I'm afraid that is a real risk indeed. I think the articles related to the crisis are the most dystopian, if I may use the word, articles.
To be very frank with you, I was very even scared when I see the attitude with which Thierry Breton seems to be seeking confrontation. This tweet that he sent out announcing that Twitter will be, or X will be investigated, has been viewed now more than 5 million times. It has been hugely criticized by a tremendous amount of comments, which are largely all negative, and he doesn't seem to care. It's a bit like this image that Tucker Carlson used about somebody being taken hostage and thrown in the back of the car. And then the really creepy moment is when the hostage taker takes off his mask, because then you see nothing good will follow. He will have to kill you. And I'm very taken aback by this attitude by Thierry Breton, who does not seem to care about the negative comments and this, let's say 90% of the comments reacting to this tweet announcing the investigation of Twitter are all in defense of free speech and the EU acting totalitarian way, but they don't seem to care, and that really scares me.
Yes, it is a little bit frightening. I do agree with that. Of course, it is a first step. It is not the end of democracy as we know it, but it is certainly a step in that direction, and I think we should do all we can to counter it and hopefully one day undo it. Maybe one thing to mention also is that Europe is, of course, very wary of being labeled, the European Commission is wary of being labeled the Ministry of Truth. And yes, very often they will tackle it head on. They will say we are not the Ministry of Truth. And their defense is that they do not impose specific terms and conditions, and they do not define exactly what content needs to be avoided on the platform and what is true and what is false. In fact, the articles themselves, they do not contain the term disinformation or misinformation in the DSA. The preamble does, though. The motivation does. But the articles themselves do not. Now, that is hypocritical in my opinion, because, of course, indirectly, they do define what is true and what is false. And they do define what should be avoided on the platforms and what not. Because they are the ones who will ultimately decide whether the terms and conditions and the content moderation policies from the platforms are acceptable to them. And if not, if they should be fines, extremely high fines.
And indeed, also Thierry Breton does not shy away from using the word disinformation in the tweet where he announces this investigation. So he uses this term, which is not in the DSA.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there cannot be any doubt, of course. So in informal communications and in the preamble, the term is used a lot. So it's a clear purpose. But it is not used in the more formal communication in the articles because it's an ill-defined term. Nobody can there is no oracle that will tell us what is disinformation and what is not. The only oracle there is European Commission in this case, and it's not right to make a political body be an oracle of truth.
So in summary, Professor, how could we make this better? You mentioned that it should be content agnostic, that there should be an effort to identify not only people by their real identity, but also the bots. When a bot is active on these platforms, it should be clearly identifiable. Is there anything else that we could take away as a positive way to handle this problem? Because it cannot be the Wild West.
The main problem going forward with AI is that you cannot clone people. Every person has one voice and a limited bandwidth to speak to the world. But if you can clone yourself through AI bots, then it's indefinite, and then the person with the biggest budget will be able to influence the opinion very strongly. So that is a problem. For that reason, I think distinguishing between identified people and maybe bots that somebody takes responsibility for, an identified person takes responsibility for, and separating how you treat them from how you treat unidentified anonymous accounts, which may be bots and may not be bots. I think is a key element. And I think the first type should be given a bigger platform than the second type, than those who may be bots, and that's inevitable.
That makes total sense to me. There's one more element which we haven't discussed. I was a bit surprised to read it, that you seem to argue for algorithmic, am I saying that correct? A way of suppressing when content suddenly starts exploding. Could you maybe elaborate a little on this point? What problem is that solving, and how should we see this?
So algorithms which define your X timeline, for example, or your Facebook timeline, they tend to amplify content that tends to be clicked on a lot for obvious reasons, because that is what is driving engagement on the platform. The result of those algorithms is a virality thing, right? That a message on X or on Facebook or whatnot can become extremely popular, totally eclipse any other content on the platform. And that is what we are seeing today, that there is a very long tail of content that is almost read by nobody, and then a very small number of messages that are read by the vast majority of people. And that is something that can be very destabilizing, right? Because it means that a small number of people can really impose a certain opinion on the public narrative. And I think that is the thing that is actually worrying the Commission, and rightly so in a sense, because especially if it is AI driven. So what could be done to counter that is to enforce through legislation, for example, through a better version of the DSA, to use algorithms which do not result in that kind of behavior, which somehow put brakes on virality of content, if you see what I mean. And that may seem like an infringement on the freedom of the platform, and to some extent it is, but any law will be an infringement on the freedom of the platforms. But it differs from the current approach in that it is content agnostic. It will apply to any content, regardless of whether it is deemed to be true or desirable or undesirable by the European Commission or any other political actor.
This kind of algorithm, does it influence the final number of people who see the message, or is it just trying to put a little oil on the waves? In the end, what does it change? Does it change the number of people who view the message, or does it just change the time in which this message can reach so many people?
Of course, I have no specific algorithm in mind, but I do know that existing algorithms, they do result in this very biased attention to a very small number of messages only, and that is what is causing certain risks in the social media online discourse. And I think what we should be trying to achieve is a normal kind of discourse, in the sense of the way that we used to have a conversation between normal people, where everybody has a limited reach, and opinion can spread, and different people form their own opinions, and then maybe they voice the same opinion, of course, but maybe they change it a little bit because they had their own perception and perspective on it. And I think it is a much more rigorous and more robust way of having an online discussion than the kind of online discussion where some content can be heavily amplified and other content is completely suppressed in practice. And I think that is a lot safer from a democratic perspective than to decide which content can be seen and which content has to be suppressed based on the message carried by this content.
What I like about this proposal, Professor, is that ultimately it will also encourage a different type of content. Because the type of content which is viral is people shouting at each other, taking extreme positions. So if you add this kind of layer, it's not encouraging this type of crazy, polarizing attitudes anymore, and it sort of makes the whole place a little more adult, mature, and civilized. Is that a good way to put it?
Absolutely. In fact, to a very minimal extent, the DSA contains a little bit of this idea. Specifically, the recommender systems that are being used for recommending messages to you. The very large online platforms have the obligation under the DSA to also offer you the option to not use the recommender system underlying. And then you just get the chronological order, for example, of all the messages of the people that you follow. Now, this is something that most people will not use because this is not a very useful feed. It will contain lots of information that you're not so interested in, because of course the recommender is useful. It is doing something that makes the platform more valuable to you. Now we have two options. Either we have the useless option, which is no recommendation at all, or we have the recommender, which is creating virality effects. And I think by disallowing this extreme virality kind of recommenders, there may be a way to come at the middle ground where we do get interesting content. We get to see interesting content that we want to see. But at the same time, it is not the rich gets richer kind of effect where very small number of messages that now currently under the DSA are actually selected to be desirable to the European Commission, that those get seen by many people, and other messages do not get seen at all.
Yeah, that seems to be where they are missing the ball. Professor Tijl De Bie, thank you very much for your content. To finalize, where can people find you online?
I think the best thing is to Google my name, and then you will find my research group, and you will also find maybe a blog, but it has a Dutch title. It's called doordenkers.be.
I will put a link in the description to doordenkers.be. You also have a
Twitter
account?
In English. Yes, I do indeed. Twitter, Tijl De Bie is my Twitter handle indeed, yes.
Tijl De Bie, Twitter handle. Tijl De Bie, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Paul.